I've been a police officer for over a decade, and I thought I had seen it all. But one night shift forever changed my perception of the world and left me haunted by an unexplainable horror. It was a cold, foggy night, and I was patrolling the quiet streets of our small town. The darkness was oppressive, and the only sounds were the occasional distant howl of a dog or the echoing footsteps of my partner, Officer Johnson, walking alongside me. As we made our rounds, a call came in about a possible break-in at an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Reluctantly, we decided to investigate. The house had been abandoned for years, and rumors of it being haunted had spread among the locals. Upon arrival, we saw that the house was in shambles. Broken windows and graffiti adorned its decaying walls. Johnson and I approached cautiously, our flashlights piercing through the dense fog. We checked for signs of forced entry, but the place was eerily intact. The moment we stepped inside, an unsettling feeling washed over me. The air was thick with a musty scent, and the darkness seemed almost alive, closing in on us like a suffocating blanket. Our footsteps echoed through the empty halls as we explored the dilapidated rooms. Suddenly, we heard a faint noise from upstairs, a soft, haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. Johnson and I exchanged nervous glances before deciding to ascend the creaky staircase. The music grew louder as we climbed, and my heart pounded in my chest. With each step, an overwhelming sense of dread gripped me. I wanted to turn back, to flee from whatever malevolent force lurked within those walls, but duty held me in place. We reached the top floor, and the source of the melody became apparent. A flickering light emanated from a room down the hallway. Our flashlights revealed a gramophone in the corner, playing an old vinyl record that seemed to be untouched by time. The room was adorned with ancient family portraits, all with their eyes seemingly fixed on us, following our every move. Johnson took a step forward to turn off the gramophone, but as he did, the music stopped abruptly, and the room fell into complete darkness. An eerie silence enveloped us, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing coming from behind us. We turned around to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, its features obscured by darkness. My instinct was to draw my weapon, but fear paralyzed me. The figure seemed to glide closer, its steps making no sound on the creaky floorboards. I called out, demanding the intruder to identify themselves, but my words echoed without a response. My pulse raced as the figure drew nearer, revealing a pale, gaunt face and vacant, lifeless eyes. It was a man, or at least it resembled one, but there was an otherworldly quality to his appearance that defied explanation. Without warning, the figure lunged at us with inhuman speed. Johnson and I stumbled backward, our hearts pounding in terror, but the figure seemed to pass right through us, as if it were made of smoke and shadows. I felt a chilling coldness seep into my bones, freezing me in place. As the figure disappeared into the darkness, we regained our composure and ran back downstairs. We decided to call for backup and thoroughly search the house, but when the additional officers arrived, there was no sign of the intruder. The gramophone had vanished, leaving behind an empty corner. We filed a report and tried to make sense of what had happened, but the incident remained a mystery. The house was once again deemed abandoned, and it was left to decay in silence, its secrets buried within its crumbling walls. Months passed, but the memory of that night never faded. Johnson and I were haunted by the encounter, unable to shake the feeling that we had crossed paths with something beyond our understanding. We both suffered from sleepless nights and inexplicable nightmares, reliving that nightmarish experience. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the mind, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. But deep down, I knew that what I had witnessed was real, even if it defied rational explanation. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the world is not as black and white as we like to believe. There are forces at play beyond our comprehension, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered by those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. I may never fully understand what happened that night, but it serves as a chilling reminder that some horrors are very real, even for those sworn to protect and serve. As a seasoned police officer, I thought I had seen it all, from gruesome crime scenes to dangerous encounters. But nothing could have prepared me for the chilling horror that awaited me at Precinct 13, the oldest police station in our city. It was a quiet night shift when I received a distress call from the precinct. Officer Daniels, a close friend and fellow officer, was on the other end of the line. His voice trembled as he described strange occurrences happening at the station. lights flickering, doors slamming shut on their own, and eerie whispers echoing through the corridors. Thinking it was just a prank or a case of nerves, I dismissed his fears and decided to head over to the precinct to offer some reassurance. As I arrived, the old building stood before me, casting an imposing shadow under the moonlit sky. Its crumbling brick walls and faded insignia gave it an air of history and mystery. Officer Daniels met me at the entrance, his face pale with fear. He insisted on showing me the areas where the inexplicable events had taken place. Reluctantly, I followed him through the dimly lit corridors. The air felt heavy, and an unsettling silence hung in the atmosphere. As we walked, we heard faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to rationalize the sounds. But there was something undeniably eerie about the place. It was as if the building itself was trying to communicate. In the break room, Daniel showed me surveillance footage from the previous night. The footage was chilling. It showed chairs moving on their own, coffee mugs sliding across the table, and cabinets opening and closing without human intervention. Goosebumps formed on my skin as I watched the unexplained events unfold before my eyes. Determined to debunk the phenomena, we decided to stay the night, setting up cameras and recording devices throughout the precinct. As the night wore on, the feeling of unease intensified. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of our vision, and the temperature dropped dramatically. At one point, we heard footsteps echoing through the empty hallways, as if someone or something was pacing relentlessly. But when we rushed to investigate, there was no one to be found. The building was deserted, yet it felt alive with unseen presence. As the clock struck midnight, things took a terrifying turn. The lights began to flicker, plunging the precinct into darkness. Panic set in, and we fumbled for flashlights to guide our way. The air grew cold, and our breaths fogged before us. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. It was a sound that I can never forget, a haunting cry of agony and despair. Daniels and I ran toward the source, praying that it wasn't what we feared. We found Officer Jennings, a young and bright officer, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. He claimed he had been attacked by an invisible force, dragged across the floor by an unseen entity. His uniform was torn, and he had deep scratches on his arms and face. Fearing for our lives, we called for backup, and several more officers arrived at the scene. But as we recounted our experiences, skepticism clouded their faces. They thought we were playing a prank, trying to scare them on a quiet night. But we knew better. We had witnessed the malevolence that lurked within the precinct's walls. The backup officers agreed to stay with us until morning, but as the night wore on, it became clear that they too felt the chilling presence. Doors slammed shut, lights flickered, and unexplained noises echoed through the building. Fear was etched on everyone's faces, and the skepticism had turned to a shared dread. As dawn approached, we were finally able to leave the haunted precinct. None of us could shake the feeling that something malevolent had taken root within those walls, something beyond our understanding. In the weeks that followed, the precinct became a hotspot for paranormal investigators and thrill seekers. Many claimed to have encountered ghostly apparitions and experienced unexplained phenomena. The stories of Precinct 13 spread like wildfire, turning the once ordinary police station into a notorious haunted location. To this day, the precinct remains abandoned, its dark secrets hidden within its crumbling walls. The horror we experienced that fateful night changed us forever. Some left the force, unable to cope with the trauma, while others, like me, continue to carry the weight of that night's terrors in our hearts. The haunting of Precinct 13 serves as a chilling reminder that there are forces beyond our comprehension, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. And sometimes it's better to leave the mysteries of the past undisturbed, lest they consume us in darkness.